And we saw that China's President Xi Jinping did praise his meeting with the New Zealand Prime Minister Chris Hipkins, calling their relationship as robust and strong. With more analysis, joining us live is Gordon Flake, the CEO of the Perth USAsia Centre. Gordon, good to see you. Thanks for your time. Like Australia, New Zealand obviously has this complex relationship with China. Like our political leaders here, Chris Hipkins really had that tricky diplomatic line to walk during these recent talks. Notably, a couple of days ago, Hipkins refused to label Xi as a dictator, as we saw Joe Biden do last week.
Well, there are some real parallels between our approach here in Australia and the New Zealand approach. And I would think it's a general strategy to reduce the temperature, to avoid kind of provocative issues and try to find some new normal in terms of the relationship. In the case of New Zealand, there was particular anxiety because the Foreign Minister Mahuta received what was reported to have been a haranguing or a dressing down in March. And I think the new Prime Minister of New Zealand was keen to make sure the same thing didn't happen this time. And by all accounts, he was successful. It was very much a trade-focused mission. And he said some things I think the Chinese would quite like. So it's not quite surprising that the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, would have praised the New Zealand Prime Minister.
Yeah, the PMO here in Australia might be taking notes after that one. Gordon, while we've got you, I'm keen also to hear your thoughts on that near uprising in Russia over the weekend. I see in the US today, the news site Politico, it's reporting that the US made sure that it reached out to Russia during this, while it was all happening, to make sure that there was no confusion about the US's lack of involvement in terms of what was going on. That must have been pretty crucial for the US, I assume, to ensure that it wasn't dragged into it or wrongly blamed, for that matter, for what it clearly saw as an internal Russian situation.
Well, there's an old saying by Napoleon that says, do not interrupt your enemy when he's making mistakes. On the one hand, the last thing the United States or NATO, anybody else wanted to do was make this a story about them. But on the other hand, there's real concerns about Russian stability, Russia's perception of the world, Russian nuclear weapons, et cetera. And so I think the fact that the U.S. President Joe Biden and his administration was very quick to reach out through normal diplomatic channels to assure the Russian leadership that they had no part in this was designed to emphasize the importance of that stability in that very, very volatile weekend that we just experienced.
Yeah, how damaged do you think Putin's emerged from all of that?
Well, this is an open question. The initial reactions, obviously, were a lot of people hoping that this was going to lead to real instability within Russia itself without thinking through some of the longer term ramifications for that. It is clear that his international reputation, at least, has taken a bit of a hit, but much depends on what happens in the coming days. Further actions taken against other members of his defense forces or not, how they proceed to kind of carve up the remains of the Wagner Group and what the consequences there are. So again, I think it's still very much too early to tell, at least for someone like myself, viewing it from the farthest corner of the world here.
Looking at domestic politics in the US, Donald Trump, again, surprise, surprise, making more headlines, more audio out yesterday of him, well, really not leaving much wriggle room, does it, when it comes to those charges that he's facing over those classified documents?
Yeah, the fact that CNN had a leaked copy of the transcript and actually the actual recording of the conversation itself, where the president is pretty explicit, not just admitting, but admitting what he did and why he did it. It makes it really difficult, I think, for any prosecutor to avoid going forward on that. And it begins to frame the discussion, particularly since this is just one of many ongoing legal avenues at this point. So, but obviously, as you pointed out, it hasn't seemed to impact his popularity among his base. At the same time, as I've said on this program before, I see little evidence that it's doing anything to increase the size of his base or win over independents or other voters.
Absolutely. No, nothing changing on that front, at least. Gordon Flake, always appreciate your time. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.